To truly understand the secret war for the future of technology, we first have to understand what everyone is actually fighting over. It's not just a race for faster computers, it's a race for the new oil of the 21st century. As we sit here in 2026, the demand for high-performance chips is at an all-time high. Every time you ask an AI to write an email, every time a company trains a new model, and every time a consumer interacts with a smart device, a tiny piece of silicon is doing the heavy lifting. This demand has turned the semiconductor market into a $100 billion a year goldmine, with projections aiming for $1 trillion by the end of the decade. But because these chips are incredibly difficult and expensive to design and build, only a handful of manufacturers are allowed to make them. If you are new here, please consider subscribing to join the Axiom community. Don't miss the next chapter of the story. Moving on, you might wonder why these tiny computer chips are so expensive. Computer chips perform billions of calculations per second, math so complex it would take a human a lifetime to solve, powering everything from the software in your pocket to the massive AI brains of the future. Now, back to the battle for tech supremacy. At the center of this battle are three tech giants, each with a very different story. First, there's NVIDIA, based in Santa Clara, California. Founded in 1993, they started as a niche company making graphics cards for gamers. For decades, they were the fun company, the one that made your video games look realistic. Today, they are a $3 trillion titan, essentially acting as the architect for the entire AI era. Then there's AMD, NVIDIA's neighbor and longtime rival. Worth over $400 billion, they've spent decades being the value king, offering powerful hardware at a lower price point. They are the scrappy challenger that refused to stay in second place. Finally, there's the old guard, Intel. Once the undisputed king of Silicon Valley, Intel is currently fighting for its life. After a massive 60% stock plunge in 2024, they are now valued at around $100 billion, a fraction of their former glory, and are gambling everything on a massive $100 billion factory expansion to regain their lead. But to really understand how the ground shifted, we have to look at the people behind the screens, the developers. For a long time, hardware companies thought their only job was to make the fastest box. They thought developers would simply flock to whoever had the most teraflops or gigahertz. But they were wrong. Developers are humans. They want tools that make their lives easier. They want software that works the first time they plug it in. As AI began to move from a science fiction dream to a corporate necessity, the cost of these chips skyrocketed. We aren't talking about $50 parts anymore. We are talking about $40,000 processors. When the stakes are that high, a developer doesn't just want the fastest chip, they want the one that won't crash their billion-dollar project because of a software bug. The war we see today didn't actually start with a better chip, it started with a massive shift in how software developers work. You see, building a chip is one thing, but getting people to use it is another. Back in 2005, a moment occurred that changed history forever. Intel's leadership was presented with a proposal to buy a small, upstart company called NVIDIA for just $20 billion. At the time, Intel's board laughed at the price tag. They didn't think graphics chips were important enough to justify the cost. They chose to build their own internal projects instead, that eventually failed after consuming hundreds of millions of dollars. This was the trillion-dollar mistake. While Intel protected its old business, NVIDIA spent nearly 20 years building a secret weapon called CUDA. This was how NVIDIA managed to find an edge over the other two tech giants. You see, this wasn't a chip, it was a software language that allowed developers to easily talk to GPUs. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, insisted that every single chip they sold had to support CUDA. By the time the AI boom hit in 2023, millions of students had graduated from college knowing only one language for high-performance computing, CUDA. When companies like OpenAI or Meta needed to build the next generation of AI, they didn't look at who had the prettiest hardware, They looked at what their engineers already knew how to use. This created huge dominance and preference for CUDA as it was well popular. Even when AMD released their own Instinct chips, which featured more memory and lower prices, they hit a brick wall. To switch to an AMD chip, companies would have to stop their progress, retrain their staff, and rewrite millions of lines of code. Currently, NVIDIA holds 80% to 90% of the AI chip market because their software is so deep that switching to a competitor isn't just a hardware upgrade, it's a massive downgrade in quality. The cost of NVIDIA's dominance has forced the other tech giants to organize themselves and compete fiercely. Intel is finally showing real progress with its 18A manufacturing node. They are building massive, state-of-the-art foundries in Ohio and Arizona, signaling massive expansion and competition with NVIDIA. Meanwhile, AMD has released open-source software which easily translates CUDA software. They want to make it so easy to move code from NVIDIA to AMD that the monopoly simply vanishes. They are betting on the idea that eventually, the world will get tired of NVIDIA high prices and look at alternative options. And it's working. We've seen major players like Microsoft and Meta begin to shift small portions of their workloads over to these open-source platforms. The biggest threat to NVIDIA dominance isn't actually Intel or AMD anymore. Many more companies like Huawei, Google, Meta, and Amazon are now designing their own custom AI chips, tailored specifically for their own software. The market is moving away from NVIDIA domination to diverse local manufacturers who offer good value for money. The trillion-dollar mistake Intel made back in 2005 wasn't about missing a hardware trend, it was about underestimating the power of a community. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending your time with me. This journey reveals a world where the lines of code are just as powerful as the silicon they run on. But now, I want to hear from you. We've talked a lot about NVIDIA's massive software today, so here's my question for the comments. If you were the CEO of Intel or AMD today, would you keep fighting with NVIDIA, or would you pivot entirely to something new? I'll be reading your theories and responding to all of them. If this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the tech giants, please hit that like button. It's a small gesture, but it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Axiom. I would love for you to be part of the community as we explore what's coming next. Your support is what keeps these documentaries alive. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.